This is Tara Alexander of the SHERO Network, and I'm honored today to present to you The Courage to Ask, a roundtable discussion with three of the most phenomenal women that I know. They are committed to community, committed to their families, and of course, committed to making this world a better place. Linetta Gilbert, Vanessa Reed, and Alicia Oliver are all concerned about making sure that we have the funds we need to be able to do the things that we have been called to do. So if that is you today, I want you to enjoy this conversation. I'll be back at the end. And of course, welcome to SHERO Conference, because this is the place where we empower women to impact community. Please receive our moderator, Ms. Alicia Oliver.
It's so good to be back here with SHERO. You just have a way of making me feel like my gifts are so valued, and I thank you. I thank God for those gifts. Yeah, I don't think there's anything that we do alone, and together we are empowered, emboldened to just speak and share. So thank you for that. Also today, I am honored to be joined by two women as we talk about asking for money, asking for funding for our causes, for our purpose, for our passions, our interests, our hearts. And so these two ladies, Vanessa Reed is a corporate funder. She also serves on nonprofit boards and is the chair of a board right now, so has a lot of experience with both asking and, importantly, giving as well. And so we're excited for the wealth of wisdom and knowledge. And I tell you, ladies, Vanessa and I just started chatting in preparation for this. And we determined that from the 4 or 5 points we covered today, each one could be an hour-long presentation, right, Vanessa? So yeah, I think you're gonna need those that paper and pen and be ready. And the courage to ask, for me, comes as sometimes a struggle, especially when you're looking and asking people for their time. And Linetta Gilbert is my friend, my mentor, my coach. And we were once even semi-colleagues, although I don't think I was in your league, but when I was a program officer for a foundation, so for a stint there, we were colleagues. But I tell you what, it's going to be really hard for me to open my mouth during this conversation today, because Linetta Gilbert, who is a funder, a philanthropist, a trustee on a foundation that gives money, we could not ask. And it took a lot of courage for me to just say, Linetta, will you join us in this conversation today? And you know what? Because I asked, and because I think, I don't know why, but she said yes. And I'm just honored to have you here as part of this conversation. And I'm going to shift roles from student, learner, colleague to listener and as well. So thank you ladies for being here. We're going to get our conversation started. I was doing something else and a quote came to me from Arthur Ashe. It says, start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. And I've recently, and I think in this 2020, in the year 2020, the most giving ever has taken place. I watched Bezos' ex-wife give $1 billion, I think she gave, a lot of money. So people are willing to give, but what are they willing to give for? There are 5 questions that we're going to talk about. How do I articulate my passion or interest into a funded request? Does my passion fulfill a need in my community? Or as you will learn, what assets are you trying to elevate or amplify? Who do I ask for funding? How do I ask? And then Tara, who introduced me, will also join the conversation and give us more, especially from a spiritual perspective, about the courage to ask and what that really means. And so you're in for a treat. We're going to go ahead and get started. And I'm going to put the first question out there for Vanessa and Linetta, and you chime in when you're ready. Question one, how do I articulate my passion into a funded request?
I'll open us up. I think really it starts with understanding the need and being able to articulate it to someone else that is a potential funder. When that breaks down, I think it's difficult for that person to then go take that information and turn that into something, from a corporate standpoint. I have to be able to explain who you are and what you do. And if you can't explain that to me, then it's difficult for me to go and speak with a larger committee that may be helping me to make those kinds of decisions. Why should we give? What is the return on investment?
So first of all, I'm just honored to be in this group. So thank you very much for having me. And so I did most of my work in funding in an area called community philanthropy. So my specialty, even though when I worked at the Ford Foundation, it was a global foundation, I focused on communities and their giving. So how do you ask somebody for something? I think Vanessa said it from the beginning. You have to know who you are and what it is that you really are promoting. Needs are very important. If your idea always has to come from a standpoint of what you believe is important for others in your community, not just yourself. But I've always wanted to hear something about what your organization brings to the dilemma. And I also want to know something about the people in the places that you will be helping. What do they bring to the problem solving? Years ago, John McKnight and Jody Kretzmann did a lot of research that said we often miss our opportunities for change, big change and little change, because we overlook the people who are in the place where change needs to happen. And so I kind of grew up with that school of thought and believe that there are assets everywhere. We just have to look closely enough to find them. And so as a funder, I became what they call a talent scout. I knew their talent is out there everywhere, and especially in marginalized communities, Black communities, Hispanic communities. People had been solving their problems, but they didn't have enough resources to make it a big solution. So I really think that you start out by presenting who you are, what you bring to the conversation, to the problem solving, and who are your buddies? Who's your posse? Who's out there with you? They may be called board members of your nonprofit. They could be called community members, but I want to know about those folks because I want to know that if for some reason you're not in the picture anymore, whatever we've invested in will continue and continue and continue with or without you. So looking at who you are, what you bring, and I call all that, and who your supporters are, I call all that your assets.
That's interesting because you also said, where are the people in the challenge or in the problem, and what are they saying, and what they need. And I think a lot of times, especially as someone who works in this profession and writes grants or seeks funding for different causes, I always say that we are responsive to the needs of the individuals we seek to support or serve or change, however you look at it. And we don't know that we're responding if we don't do the homework and ask and do the research to know. And we are most successful and Tara can tell you, when our community says, this is how we see this working out. This is how we can solve that. So it's not only who you are, because you're already pretty special coming to ask to help somebody else. And what are your strengths in bringing that, but also what are you going to do? And I think we're going to get to that question, why you're doing it. You're doing it because of a response to need. I think I've had a lot of success. I've raised multiple millions of dollars on that principle. It's, what are we doing that the people say they need? And it's not always somebody up here coming to tell me what's going to work. Like, I know better. This worked for my kid, it should work for yours.
So I want to agree with you, and I also want to push you a little bit. Responsive grant making is one way of dealing with situations, but we have some wisdom keepers in our communities. We have people who have known for years that what might improve public education is this or that. They've never gotten the resources to make that kind of research or that hope or guess happen. But we witnessed charter schools being funded by people who didn't come out of those communities. They had a big idea. So I'm saying to you, sometimes there's a responsive grant making that happens. Sometimes the most that somebody who has resources can do is to hedge their bets. They can say, I'm gonna, just for the heck of it, I'm gonna see if this group can do that, because no one's doing it, and we know that will have some impact. So I'm just gonna be a risk taker and say, we're gonna put some money behind this or that. That's how Van Jones got started, for example, when he was doing the green work. Nobody was talking about green, and he was talking about green, and he was talking about Ella Baker, organizing and green. And so here, fast forward 15 years, what do we need? Green and organizing. That's Black Lives Matters. He didn't coin that, but he said we've got to organize young people. So that, to me, that's a way of elevating and amplifying an idea that nobody else is doing. But when you make a grant, you're looking to see what's the possibility of this. And only one grant maker nationally funded him. It's a young woman who was at the Ford Foundation, and she was the first one to say, I'm going to go Van Jones, and didn't nobody know Van Jones. And then 3 years later, 2 or 3 creeped in and joined with her until she was able to convince them that this was the guy. This was the idea for the future and for the present, because he was generating jobs. He was getting people out of jail to work in the green industry, right? So that's what I'm saying. There's lots about philanthropy and giving that's changing now, only because we now know we are in the future. And you have to hedge your bets. And it's a common way of saying, a woman of faith will say, you have to trust God. You have to trust that if you are a person of faith, that the Holy Spirit is guiding you. Because remember, God knows the end of the story. So he's giving us the ability to do those things. Don't just rest on what has happened and now we got to respond to it, because some of that didn't have to happen had we been proactive. Maybe that's an old term too, but that kind of thing.
Can I chime in here? So I totally agree with you, Miss Linetta, because part of being a good funder is being able to see beyond the here and now, and recognize, like you said, the opportunity to be proactive. And so sometimes when I'm sitting around the table and I'm the only Black or brown in the room, the conversation has to be had that we talk about, well, we can pay now or we can pay later. And I guarantee you, more than likely, the price that we pay later will far exceed if we had been proactive and done something today. And so those are the conversations that I think it's important for you or me to be in the room to voice those concerns to people who will fund, but they don't necessarily understand how to approach it or what the need is. Sometimes we think if we just put a Band-Aid on it, that's it. But you got to change the bandage over and over and over again. Let's try to work on fixing the problem instead of putting a Band-Aid on a larger issue.
Pretty powerful and perfect segue into the second question. And we're touching on a broader conversation here. But yeah, does my passion fulfill a need in my community? And what I'm hearing both of you say is we can identify situations that we want to change to enhance the lives of others, but are we doing enough forward thinking and forward looking so that, as Vanessa said, we're not just putting a Band-Aid or a patch on something that we know, as Linetta said, has been around for years and is unchanged, or someone can come along and say, hey, I can fix this, without even knowing the people who they're wanting to fix it for. They might have the big idea, as you called it, Linetta. So yeah, let's talk about this need, because I think from a previous conversation, one thing we should know when we're asking is, why are we asking? What are we asking for? And I called it a need. I know, Linetta, you had a different opinion.
Well, I do have a different opinion, because I think we look too much at what's wrong, and not so much at how we can create something or expand something to address what is required, or what would help move us forward. So yes, I know there's an important value in understanding the data about who's in the community and their conditions and all. But you use that as a tool, use data as a tool to decide, how do we address what the data is telling us? So for example, recently, since the pandemic in New Orleans was so horrible, so fast, the data center started collecting information, and somewhere in the summer they said, are the deaths that are occurring because people didn't get to care fast enough, or that people were living in circumstances where if one person in the household got it, everybody else was destined to get it, because there's only one bathroom. There are multiple people in bedrooms. You know how we live, right? And the question was, when we're talking about then affordable housing, what are we talking about that could not only make the cost of housing go down, but make the health conditions, which could be affected by how we live, how it could lessen our risk for health conditions. So when you are talking with people, and remember, I'm talking about talking with people because I'm talking about community-based giving. Remember, you never know who has the ability to fund or give money to address an issue. So it's not always a need. Sometimes it's a need. People are hungry. We need people to give food and give money to organizations that distribute the food. But somebody else may be saying, well, what would happen if we were generating neighborhood gardens that people in the neighborhood help to grow, and they could get fresh fruits and vegetables, and they may still need some other kind of food? Is that an answer to a long-standing problem? Because whenever there's food insecurity, whether it's a war or a hurricane or whatever, what would happen if we could provide that? So then a person who's making a grant could say, some of our money will go to Second Harvest, but we're going to start investing in neighborhood gardens teaching people about growing, teaching people about healthy eating, engaging young and old people in it because it's good exercise and it's fellowship, it's socialization. So that's the kind of thing you want to think about when you're talking about who you're going to approach about your idea. And more importantly, you should be talking, if it's a good idea, you should be talking about it with everybody instead of worrying about who shot John, or Mary didn't get this. When I first met Tara Alexander, for example, and she said to me, we were talking about something entirely, she said, my daughter is she's decided she wants to go into business. And so we're going to support her in her entrepreneurship. I thought, wow, who does that? Well, a mom does it, but also an entrepreneurial person does it. So I don't even know if she ever got a grant or anything to do it, but she talked with me at the time. She talked to other people. I bet you there were just 29 people who just said, here, honey, we put a little money in your hand. Tell me how it works out. Or call me when you get it going. I'm gonna come and buy something. So we have to remember, giving is more than just the groups that we represent, corporate philanthropy or large philanthropy, organized foundations, endowed foundations. We have more in the Black community and in the community writ large. We have more discretionary wealth than we've had ever before at all levels. And so we can support each other, whoever each other is in our community. We can support new ideas and get them to a point where they are visible so that a larger funder can come along. And remember, in South Africa, when they had the AIDS pandemic, they lost thousands of men and women at the childbearing age who had left children. And as the pandemic grew and grew, individual people in those communities, they couldn't wait on big donors to show up. They cared for the sick. They took those babies into their homes. They did everything they could do. By the time big funders got there, what we had to work on was research on cures or things that would abate the AIDS virus. People knew that it was sexually driven there, so they had to then begin to figure out, how do we talk to our sons and daughters about their interactions? And they gave their time and their money. And remember, that's time, talent, treasure, and testimony. That's what we give. That's what we have to give. So talk it up. If you got a good idea, talk it up. You just don't know who's there, who's going to help you elevate the idea and solve a problem. I'm sorry, didn't mean to go on and on.
Oh no, that is so rich. And the nugget there is to talk it up and talk to everybody. And that makes me think, in one of my previous presentations, you may have been there, SHERO's, the giving pie chart, where corporations give 5% and foundations give 17%. The bulk of the money comes from individual donations, 69%, almost 70%. So to your point, Linetta, talk it up. You don't know who's asking. We have the answers in our community. Valeda Fullwood wrote an amazing book on and does many talks on Black philanthropy. You know who gives the most? And I think you've heard me say this before, Black women, and we give the most to our churches. And the most of the giving, according to that same pie chart, of all the billions of dollars that we're giving, the majority of it goes to those religious and church and those sorts of foundations, because those are the foundations.
So, I often teach my kids, I'll ask them the question, well, how much are you willing to invest? And so when you see that the community is actually taking a part and taking ownership of doing some of those things, it's easy for the corporations to kind of come in and support that. And so that's very important. What kind of sweat equity are you willing to contribute, in order for the corporations to come in and help undergird what you're already doing?
So my husband was my first funder at $619 to start this program. And he said, look, and we put our money into it. I didn't have a building. Well, and I'm saying this for somebody that needs to hear this. I didn't have a building. So, but every Easter Sunday morning, I would go and sing for this church. And I said, I asked other churches and they didn't do it, but I called these people who I wasn't connected with, and I asked them to ask the pastor and say, hey, look, I have this idea about this summer camp for kids and whatever. And I said, but I can write it all out and I have it all written and I'll send it to you. He said, yes. I said, but when do you want to set up the meeting so I can meet with the board? He said, yes. And I kept, because I couldn't believe that the yes came so quick. Well, when I asked the right other people, it didn't happen like that. They told me God get with their secretary and all of that. And I wrote everything out and sent it and it never happened. But this person, I didn't stop asking. And I asked this person and he said yes. When he said yes, I want you to know that I thought for sure that everything I had it made in the shade, because I'm 20 something, my tenacious 20s, nothing stopping me. I'm going to ask. And fast forward, we did the program that year. But my husband again was my first funder. The next year, I just did the program again out of my pocket because that's what I knew. By the third year, the people who said yes for the building, they said, listen, this program is really good. You really need to think about asking somebody else to give you the money to do this on a whole nother level. So hence GPOA Foundation, which led me to Greater New Orleans Foundation, where Miss Linetta was. And it went from 12 kids to 20-something kids to 50 kids to 500 kids to 4 sites. And before you know it, we have this program that's growing. I had no clue. I'm saying that for somebody that's listening to this saying, well, Lord, I wanted to make sure that we close the gap between the person who was funding and the person seeking funds. And I really wanted to make sure you understand that they have a desire for great programming. It's the same way. So when I'm writing grants for somebody else, or I'm writing grants for myself, or I'm doing things for myself, I'm keeping that 20-something-year-old in mind that's saying, you know what? I have this great idea. I believe in it so much. I'm willing to put my dollars up. I'm willing to beg my husband and, hey, come on, let's write this in. But it was that tenacity, I'll be honest with you, that really, I believe that just opened the door. But more than anything, somebody else was on the other side saying yes. So all of the no's I heard, it didn't matter because that one yes got it. So I just wanted to say that for somebody listening that, it's a process. You don't just start, I'm going to get a grant. You know what I'm saying? I believe in my stuff so much, I'm willing to put up my dollars. Just wanted to put that.
So, Tara, I applaud you for saying that, out loud, because that's true. Lots of times people start and they hear the no so often, they get discouraged, and they may just be that one person away from yes. And sometimes you just have to do it afraid. Do it with your own, whatever you have, even if it's out of your trunk, just do it. And people will buy into it when they see it. Sometimes people just have to see it in action, and then they'll know this is good ground. This is a good investment for us. And so lots of times, even as a funder, I'll go and say, well, can I come and see your program? Can I come and see it in action, so that I can bring that same conversation and feel back to the larger committee? Sometimes I'm even prompted to bring someone along with me. Like, I can't even explain it. There's one group that I work with here in Houston. It's the Blue Triangle Multicultural Association. They're one of the oldest YWCAs here in Houston. And it's run by I'm gonna say a little seasoned lady named Miss Charlotte. And Miss Charlotte is like your favorite granny, but she can tell you the history of Houston and how, the association came about, and how this was the gathering place for many young Blacks back in the day. And so I knew I could not articulate that without a cry, because to just see the history unfold when you go to the place. She has the pictures on the wall. And so I brought one of our senior leaders over there, And all he said was, now, you know, I can't say no to Granny. I said, that's why I brought you. So sometimes it's really about seeing the bigger picture, like seeing it in action in order to get people. And the more people you have to buy into it, the more likely it is, you know, to turn into some funding for you. So sometimes you just have to go ahead and do it. Just keep asking. No today doesn't mean no forever.
Wow, this is rich and it's carrying us. So your nuggets are no doesn't mean no all the time. It might mean not right now, or you haven't brought the right person to ask, or you haven't asked enough times. No has so many meanings. And you know, from my last talk, it was 7 times no. Tell me no 7 times. And sometimes that tenacity will wear people down. I want to kind of go into the next thing. I can't believe a half hour is upon us already. So really quickly, how do I ask? And I know, Vanessa, in your role as a corporate giver, you have formats, you have a structure. It's a concept paper. It might be initiating a conversation or calling. How do you ask? I think the most important thing for me when I ask is to know the priority of the funder. When I was a funder, there was a story that my colleague would tell that the lady had her concept paper. It was all about empowering women. And then when she wrote the grant, it was for a fashion show. And so that did not meet the priority of our foundation. And yeah, fashion shows are fashion shows, no doubt. However, know your funders, know the interest of the people you ask. The other nugget I heard earlier was you don't always need a grant. You know, so understand how grants work and what grants tie you to. If you know who you are and you go after a grant, sometimes grants can sway you from that purpose or goal because that foundation has their goals and priorities that they want to meet. And we're not chasing dollars. We're solving problems, or we're selling solutions, as Linetta told me the other day. So anyone want to chime in really quickly? How do I ask?
So I love that you said we're not chasing dollars. I can't tell you how often someone walks into the office and, you know, some people call it spidey sense. I know it's, you know, Holy Spirit let me know, you know, discernment. Who should I fund? Who should we, you know, connect ourselves to? And so, you know, one of the things you said was, you know, we're not chasing dollars. So always, always, always stay on mission, because if you're encountering a funder that does it all the time, we know. Don't just change the story, you know, just because you think you're gonna say something we want to hear. Tell the true story of the organization, the mission, and you know what will be the end result. You also said something about, you know, knowing when you need a grant. That's true, because grants tie you to a commitment. So if you put it out there that you're going to do it, you really need to do what you say you're going to do. Um, and you might have to be able to report on that. What was the outcome? So, you know, and in particular, larger dollars, you will have to provide some, you know, after program, you know, metrics or measurements. I would also say you said something about fashion shows, and you're absolutely right. We don't fund an event. So even if it culminates with an event, what else happened? What is the overall premise of the program? You know, I always tell people, don't ask for funding from me for an event. Tell me about the program. What is the end result? It may culminate in a fashion show, but did you help young girls or young women with their self-esteem? You know, so what is the outcome of that program, not an event? And I'm gonna stop there. Miss Linetta may have some other comments to add.
I I don't know that I have a lot of comments. I like exactly what you said. Of course, I want us to get clear that something has happened this past year in 2020. People are seeing what America really is made up of. Not the makeup didn't change any in 2020, but now they're seeing it. They're recognizing that some of the ingenuity, some of the capacity for America to be America, to overcome, has come from cultural groups and communities that have that in their DNA, that we all as Americans do, right? But some have been here doing it over time: Native Americans, African Americans, new immigrants, those who struggled to get here. And so from that ingenuity and that drive among white Americans who were here, that drive, people are in a position now, if you're looking at problem solving in your community, or making your community a better place for everybody, this is your time. This is your time to figure out what it is that has driven you, whatever that passion is. How can that drive make change really happen for a larger group of people? Maybe your original drive was to run an after-school program. But now look at what's happened. Even before the pandemic, any state you went into in America, you had parents saying the schools aren't working. Maybe your passion is around not what happens after school, but what were the things you were going to do after school that really need to be in school happening, whether it's on the digital platform or whether it's in person. So this is our opportunity to dream big, but also to dream effectively. And so when you're approaching funders, the funders aren't static either. They've witnessed everything that everyone else has witnessed. So they're trying to figure out, how do we make our money make a difference now? Yes, we want to have our name up in lights because we gave. But at the end of the day, we're going to be held responsible more now than ever for what our investments did or did not do. Okay? So that's really where you want to weigh in now. What is my work? What difference will my work make? Not just for a year or two, but over the next 5 to 10 years. I'm starting now. But if I'm successful, I'm going to expand and need to have this group of people join me. I'm going to need to have more access to the universities. You have to use everything. Money is not the end game. The end game is, with all of the tools and resources around you, how do those things come together so that when you are given the resources, the funding, you really, in fact, can make a big, and I say big, not big in this way, but big in terms of an inroad to cracking some of these barriers, cracking the codes that have kept us from experiencing living at our privilege, not beneath our privilege as Americans. So that's really what I want you to think about. And if you're seeing this and you're not in America, take out America and put your country in it. Because I know Tara and the SHERO's movement is global. It's going worldwide. If it's not there yet, I'm calling it that. But understand now, wherever we are, we have a responsibility to get our feet out of the cement, break that cement apart, and break down the walls that we think or that have in effect kept us from making our lives the fullest that they can be. So I want you to really get that in your head. Now, that doesn't take away from what Vanessa said. Corporations are still going to be looking to see, do you have a good idea? The fashion show is only important if you're affecting the fashion designers in Milan. You know, if you're affecting the communities in Senegal where they're taking their fabrics and making them into new outfits. You know, are you changing the opportunities that women and men have for making resources available to fund schools in their communities, to have health conditions improvement. Are you doing that? If not, remember, corporations are international. They may not be interested at all in your idea. Maybe a church would fund your fashion show. Okay. So I'm just saying everything that Vanessa said, I'm putting it in front of you to say, this is not dash off your most special idea that you had 2 years ago. Don't dust it off and put it out there now. Take a look at what it is you're asking people to join you in and make sure that it is going to have the impact, the social, economic, and racial impact that is needed for the next 5 to 10 years.
That is so on point, Miss Linetta. You know, we've gone past looking at numbers. So how many bodies are in the room? What is that end result? I'm like, this is so rich. You know, I feel like we could go on and on. So much was said in reference to, you know, funding and knowing who to ask. I think I heard that from Miss Linetta's comments. Sometimes it is relegated to your church, your local body. But you know, sometimes the ask can come before, you know, corporations, especially when you're making a larger community or global impact, as Ms. Linetta said. So I'm learning as well. I felt like I've set, you know, at the foot of, and so I'll turn it back over. You have any questions of us left, ma'am?
Well, I think I am in awe and wild and have learned so much in this conversation that, and there's so much to unpack. When I said I wanted you to have nuggets to take away, this is so rich and there's so much to unpack that I want to leave that part of the conversation right there. And I'd like to turn, if I have your permission, if you don't have anything else to add, I don't know how, but I want to leave that space for you. But I want to turn it over to this courage to ask, because Miss Linetta just left us with a huge charge.
When I was a little girl, my grandparents would say certain statements. They would make these little statements. And one of the things they would tell me when I would tell them that they were over concerned about something, my mother or my grandparents would say, child, just keep living. Just keep living. One day you'll become a mother. And so when I had my baby girl, I realized that things had changed. In fact, my why became so big in my life that I didn't care what I had to do to take care of my daughter, to do whatever, whoever I had to face to deal with it. I had to learn that because this was my daughter, that all of a sudden my reason for living, for making money, for doing the things that I did, all of a sudden it became so much bigger. My why became bigger than my what. That's kind of like it is with asking. Asking is like that. It's like when you realize that what you're asking for is so important, that the people that you want to serve have to be served and that you have to do it, asking all of a sudden, though you may not like it, asking becomes a small thing. It becomes a thing that you will go through any mountain, write any grant, talk to anybody, because you know that your why is important. That the children you serve, the people that you have to feed, that the community that you have to help, that the family you have to provide for. It's so important that you don't mind asking, you don't mind knocking, and you don't mind seeking. You see, we have to come to the point where we realize that the earth is God's, the fullness thereof, the world, and they that dwell therein. And as sure as He gives us vision, He gives us provision. He will make a way, He will open doors, but we have to do our part, because faith without works is dead. So next time that we have to ask, I want us to remember all of the nuggets here to make sure our things are in order, to make sure that what we're doing is going to make an effective change, to make sure that we don't forget that the people that we're serving, they're just that, they're people. They're not numbers, they're not statistics, they are people who matter. And when people matter to us, we'll keep on asking to make the difference. Thank you so much for sharing with us at SHERO Conference, SHERO Network. We're always doing the same thing, and that is empowering women to impact community. Thanks.